Hello again, Reg audience. Welcome back to our little studio. Well, you miserable meatbags, it's you that's causing the problem this week, but you could also sort it out. That's what we're gonna find out. Security, the problem with security. Design's great, the people who use it. And so we're going to find out a little bit about that today, what exactly the problems are, why the problem is so big, and potentially some practical things that might be able to help you out. Now, who's going to be helping us sort this one out today? Well, from Proofpoint, first of all, Mike, welcome to our studio.
Thank you, Tim.
Tell people about Proofpoint.
Well, so I work for Proofpoint. I'm a strategist in EMEA, and my job is to look at the market and the trends and obviously talk about how Proofpoint fits into that. But Proofpoint as an organisation has been around for quite a while. We focus a lot of our core histories around email and email security, but we've moved towards things like targeted attack protection, threat response, and we'll talk a lot about that today.
Makes your job a bit more interesting.
It certainly does, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting, but not necessarily always in a good way.
No.
So helping Mike out today from looking at things from the front line, I suppose, is the way you could describe it. Is that right, Andy?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm Andy Herrington. I'm head of professional services at Fujitsu Cyber and Enterprise Security. Fujitsu actually has been doing security for 40 years. It's a well-kept secret. But Fujitsu over the last 2 or 3 years,
security, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. But last 2 or 3 years, we've made a very obvious move towards a security-focused business. So we've been aggregating our capabilities into a single organisation, and we offer everything from professional services consultancy from the discovery side right through to a full life cycle to managed services for our clients, government and private sector, and working with vendors like Proofpoint that we see as best in class.
Great, you got some good stories for later on.
Oh, yeah, later. Yeah, buy me a beer.
You guys, no. Everyone has to hear about these. And also from joining us from Freeform Dynamics, our old mate, Dr. Stats, the Dark Lord. This is real Dark Lord territory, isn't it?
Absolutely, Tim.
Yeah. Now, this again is something that this has always been with it, back from when you were doing this sort of stuff and you were working in IT.
Yeah, all of the audience out there know that it's the users who are the problem. It's not the IT infrastructure, it's the people and how they use systems that are really the issue that cause all of the things that keep us awake at night.
Maybe one day later we can have a Regcast to say, how you replace your users. Then the whole thing goes away.
We can do that one.
We could do that one, but maybe just not quite yet. Now, a couple of housekeeping things. Remember, ask us questions. They come through to here, and I ask the guys here. So if you don't ask a question, but we don't cover the thing you're interested in, you really have nothing to complain about. There are the links that we've got. They'll be down in a little tab there. You can find out more about the guys as well in a tab as well. But first of all, we asked Tony and Dale to do us a video, one of their videos, which are very popular now, about the issues involved in users and security. Now, you can maximize your screen for this one if you want to catch everything that Tony and Dale are saying. Please do that. This is what they told us.
My name is Dale Vile.
My name is Tony Locke.
And we're here to talk about advanced threats and the human factor, dealing with the question, are users really your first and last line of defense? The reason we're talking about this is because gone are the days when everything revolved around a Windows PC, and by locking that down, you could deal with most of your end user security problems. Today, we've got to think about smartphones and tablets, alternatives to the Windows PC, things like Apple Macs, Linux machines, and so on. And also the fact that many users are using multiple devices. Not only that, but they're bringing their own devices into the mix and introducing their own services and applications as well. So given that, there's a lot to think about in terms of the security implications of how end-user computing is evolving. What specifically, though, do we need to consider, Tony, in terms of end-user-related security risk?
We've basically got two sides of the coin here, Dale. First area concerns the whole issue of employee-related issues, lack of knowledge, user mishap, people doing things they shouldn't do, or just, acting irresponsibly, not checking where they're sending emails. But then there's the second side, which is the whole external attacks into the organization. And these are areas that are growing in concern. So phishing and other deception methods, general malware infection, and direct hacking and directly attacking organizations.
So you mentioned phishing and malware there. Surely by now people are used to the fact that this stuff goes on and know not to click on some of those dodgy links.
Well, as IT professionals, we'd love to think that that was the case, but we all know users. I mean, obviously, if these things were not working, the criminals out there wouldn't do them. So messages are being clicked on, malicious attacks are working because people are clicking on things that they shouldn't do. But importantly, these days, a lot of these clicks are actually taking place outside the four walls of the enterprise with all of these mobile users that you mentioned earlier. And they're clicking on things like voicemail, download a fax that's been sent to you, some of which may seem to be coming from people that they do trust. And of course, the ubiquitous, please click here to, update your financial details on your bank. We all know that people shouldn't do that, but they still do.
And we're hearing from Reg readers as well that they're a lot more concerned about more targeted attacks. Talk us through what's going on there.
Absolutely. In the past, where people just did phishing attacks, where they sent out emails to thousands, tens of thousands of people, hoping that one or two bite. Now, with the availability of personal data on each of us, Reg readers included, and perhaps Reg readers more than anybody else, from LinkedIn and Facebook, places like this, as well as the sites that we all read and leave our monikers on, it's easy for people to actually make social profiling of users much more of a science than it's been in the past. And this has led to the evolution of something called spear phishing. So instead of just sending out these broad waves hoping to catch someone, we're going after targeted individuals.
So you can be laser focused on those fat cats sitting on the board, for instance.
Indeed, but it's not just the senior executives who are being targeted. It's their assistants. It's even people very low down in the organization, because if you can get and compromise a machine anywhere in the network, then that's a base from which you can expand. It's a bit like the old sales opportunity, land and expand, get in somewhere, go anywhere. And of course, IT professionals with the elevated permissions that we have, are a particular risk.
So I understand why targeting large organizations that have a lot to go at from a financial perspective and represent a high degree of political leverage might make sense for the criminals. But what about smaller ones?
Well, absolutely. And smaller companies are becoming a target for two reasons. Firstly, they might themselves be in one of those targeted end user, large enterprise organizations, supply chain. So get into a small business and they become your trusted mechanism to send out an infected email with a click in it, or maybe with a compromised spreadsheet for somebody to download and open. But equally, with the economics of malware creation changing, it's much easier to put together these targeted attacks very, very quickly, making it cost effective to target even small organizations, because you may not need a multi-million pound return, but just simply a few £1,000 or a few €1,000 to make it worthwhile.
And coming closer to home, what are some of the things to think about internally from an IT perspective, things that might get in the way of you putting effective measures in place to deal with some of this stuff?
Well, the biggest issue, as the Reg readers tell us time after time, is that, users will always try and get around any security that they think gets in their way or is inconvenient. That's a big issue for everybody. But then it comes down to the fragmentation of the management tools that we have in place ourselves. We've got lots of different tools tackling different elements, and very few of them talk together and behave well. And that applies not just inside the infrastructure, but increasingly as we add in all these mobile elements there. So it's really difficult to look after everything.
That's not the first time I've heard that fragmentation of systems is a problem. Why don't you just get on and fix it, though, if you know that's an issue?
Well, basically, it's really difficult to get hold of the money to change any security systems, because people say you've got stuff already. So getting the funding is difficult, which in turn relates to the fact that management doesn't always see the value of investing in security.
So a big management awareness problem.
Absolutely.
So what I'm hearing then is greater diversity of access, advanced targeted threats, user ignorance and resistance, and a lack of air cover and investment, which all adds up to quite a significant potential risk. What does that translate to in terms of exposure for the business?
In reality, it comes down to a number of elements. The biggest one, of course, is, legal exposure. That's the thing that always grabs the headlines, exposing information that shouldn't be getting out of the business. But perhaps much more importantly is the whole reputational side of things, because if your brand gets damaged, then that has an impact on customer confidence, which ultimately results in financial loss. Get smaller revenues, people walk away from you. But it can also affect your supply chain, your customers, your partners, your suppliers themselves becoming less willing to work with you.
So that's the cost and risk side. What about the opportunity cost?
Well, the opportunity cost, of course, is very big, because Reg readers have told us on many occasions that the fear of doing new things because of the potential security exposure there stops them actually putting in new ways of working, putting in new processes that could speed things up, making new routes to market. That has a big potential on getting new revenue into the company, and maybe one of your competitors will get in there first.
So a lot to think about and very high stakes. So if you wanted to tackle this, how would you go about it?
We've asked the red readers in the past, and basically we found that those organizations that are really confident in their security capabilities have put in place a 6-piece end user security jigsaw, as we show on the slides here. Getting the exec level awareness and appreciation in place, leading to proactive investment in security, and also tackling those soft people elements, getting the employees on board so that they're aware of what's going on and understand what to do, but also what not to do and why they should not do things. That, of course, is all the people and process side, but underneath that, there's the technology level. We've got to have the right technology in place with joined up management tools and good operational processes wrapped around it, leading to good visibility and understanding so that if something does go wrong, and almost inevitably it will do, we know what to do and we notice that it's gone wrong as quickly as possible.
Well, Tony, it sounds like there's a whole conversation to be had in connection with each one of those jigsaw pieces, but you've given us a great overview of the whole area of end user security in general, so thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Dale.
And you're back in the room. So that was great. Great work again, Tony.
Thank you very much.
You're getting quite good at this.
Dal and I are now practiced.
You can keep your job. That's fantastic.
Thanks, mate.
As if I had the power.
Have you told Dal?
Yeah, to give it or take it away. Now that's a really interesting summary of the problems we got here, and but not an immediately encouraging one. And the problem seems to be, Mike, in the whole construction of the thing. Why is it so hard?
Well, I mean, as this sort of graphic shows, security is either convenient or and not secure, or secure and very, very inconvenient. Yeah. And I think the challenge is getting that balance right. But users, if it's not convenient, users are going to choose to get around it and bypass it. And if it's not secure enough, then the risk is sometimes high. So that's the crux of it, I think.
So we're basically saying damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, I think actually it's maybe there's some incorrect expectations that somehow we put in a logical system and people will function that way, but human needs and business needs aren't static. And so you bring in a system that you've designed, and it's going to have a lifespan, but that business need moves on, how people work moves on, and so people want to be productive. Humans by their very nature are activity driven, they're productivity driven, they want to do things. So, of course, if something doesn't quite work, they'll find another way of doing it. And that's kind of the inventiveness of humans as well. So I don't know whether I think it's an incorrect expectation.
Yeah, but we're just letting people off the hook then in that case, because we're just saying, if anyone says, oh, I was trying to be productive, that's not all right.
So, well, I don't think I'm saying exactly that. I think what I'm saying is maybe there's a view of why people do things, but actually it's about then recognising that and then saying, right, what do we have to do to help them around this problem, rather than saying, oh, well, it's their fault and saying there's nothing I can do.
The challenge is often that organisations don't take the effort to tell people why some security processes and procedures are in place. The importance of what happens when they're not followed. Because without that understanding, then people will take shortcuts if they can.
Yeah, but shouldn't it just be enough to say, actually, it's the rules?
People don't work that way, unfortunately. I wish they did.
Yeah. Rules can be bent, I think, and not broken. I think that's the way often people look at it. I've got a great example of, I was talking to somebody in IT who was walking through the hospital that he was managing, and they were using proximity passes, to sort of stop people from having to touch everything all the time. And he was walking past a console terminal, and there, sellotaped to the sensor was the proximity pass. And so were they being malicious? Not really. They were bending the rules, making it more convenient, perhaps, because it wasn't as convenient. They had to be leaning in a little bit more, perhaps. I don't know. Behavioural thing. It's a human factor, which is a sort of topic here. It's a challenge, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think also businesses. See the benefit in allowing people to bend the rules a little bit, because maybe people do a little bit more work, a bit more productive, a bit more inventive about what they're doing. So actually, it can actually encourage benefits within the business as well, by saying, let the people be a little less regimented. So there are two sides to this. It's not like every executive wants to say, we're going to regiment our organisation and thou must do things this way. So I think there's a kind of amorphousness to this problem.
Okay, so what we're going to do today then is to show how you can build a system where you can bend the rules a little bit, where there's rules that are flexible enough that people get, but but at the same time, there's a limit on what you can do that you can't be
I
destructive.
think we're going to try and keep it real and understand that humans are involved in this process.
I think a bit of realism and pragmatism actually is to bring to the conversation.
Okay, so let's have a look at this. So,
Okay, so one of the topics we're talking about today is the results of a survey we did called the Human Factor Report. It's really interesting because you get the insider view. Often you hear a lot about external threat intelligence and what's going on in the big bad world, but getting a view of what's going on internally in organisations is quite. So
you ask people
concept.
Within organisations
exactly
what went on.
And so what we thought we'd do is we'd sort of present the very high line of that, because that'll spark, I think, the discussion about behaviour as well. And the first one we're talking about is the sort of industries that are targeted with targeted attacks, and the majority of attacks that we see that are targeted come in via email, of course, and that's probably the first line. So you can get a lot of insight through email. And we found the usual suspects, finance being the highest targeted. But I think there's a point to remember that everybody's targeted, and we talked a little bit about in your video about small businesses being targeted as part of the supply chain. The other interesting thing we saw in the last 6 months was a huge growth in attachment-based attacks, which is very old-fashioned. It used to be quite a while ago, and it's come back in full circle. Yeah, exactly. And a severe drop in URL-based attacks. And I think there's lots of insights you could probably draw from that in terms of cyber criminals going back to the old, going back to flares or something from drain pipes, because we've forgotten about flares and they're now new and exciting, and maybe we fall for those sort of campaigns. So,
if anything, flares was a bigger crime than that. But so what we say, so the attachment-based thing is. We have problems with your remittance of something or other. Please click on this.
In fact, I think when we go to the next one, we'll sort of talk a bit about some of that. So, in terms of who's being targeted and what we're seeing them being targeted with, there was a 94% drop in consumer-themed targeted sort of messaging, if you like. Think of it as a marketing campaign. So the consumer message dropped off the cliff, and up came business sort of context. So things like voicemail or e-fax, you mentioned that on your video. Those are the sort of top things that we saw. But what we did see is everybody was targeted at all levels within the organisation. So it wasn't necessarily specific to a particular audience. But what we'll see on the next slide is that it's interesting to see who actually ends up clicking as well. So that's a conversation in itself, right? I think we've all heard of the big red button. It's on the wall. It says, please, whatever you do, don't touch this red button.
I want to touch that.
Yeah, of course you do, because you're the 1 in 25 people that will click on that email.
I'm a special person. I want to touch that button.
The other thing as well is, email's ubiquitous. It is the business application, and we're trained to click. We're trained to do it quite quickly. We've got into this. It's become habitual to open emails, to respond quickly. So
you're often doing your email in a hurry as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's again, if we're talking about the human factor here, it's about playing on what humans do in their day-to-day business.
It's also that people become much more reliant on things like spam filters to hopefully take out a lot of malicious email, whereas 10 years ago, it was still relatively new as an industry, and so people were then more likely to pay attention to the emails when they arrived, rather than assuming that they've been filtered out already, which is what happens now.
It's like this road safety thing, where if you put lots of signs in and everything like that, people stop then taking responsibility for their own driving. It's kind of like
It's a bit like in Germany, where if you cross the road and there's a red man flashing, the police can stop you. And warn you. So everybody, when they get to the traffic lights, waits for the green man to come on, even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you can't hear a car, within miles.
The other thing as well is, of course, the attack is legitimate in effect. What you're trying to do is, as an attacker, you're using a legitimate means of getting into the organisation. It's not like it's some kind of brute force attack on a server. You're not trying to crack anything in terms of systems. So you're using a means of actually just doing what is normal.
Okay. Yeah. Now, it's one thing of this one that I noticed that executives aren't actually that bad.
No, and in fact, what we found is that they are targeted slightly higher. They get more emails, but they're much better behaved, should we say? So as a user clicking it, they're more informed. Or so we think, but we could draw some conclusions there, because it wouldn't necessarily be the executive that will be opening up those emails. It would be the PA.
They've got people to open their emails for them, or not, as the case may be.
And actually, also executives don't tend to have that much privileged access to systems as well. So you can start to look at when you look at the profiling of people and the attacks, actually, IT people are a good person to attack because they're often privileged access. They have access to systems that allow somebody once they're inside to actually move around and gain a lot of control and data very quickly. So just the profile of what people do. The execs are an obvious target, but actually maybe they're not. Once you've targeted an executive, there's not much you can do.
Who are the villains in all of this? Who are the people that are behaving badly? The worst.
Well, I mean,
I want to know the worst.
So in the middle of this graphic, you'll see as a sort of departments, and so sales are the worst. Okay, that's the way it is. I've got some colleagues that will probably give me some abuse for that when I get back, but that's fine.
They can't do anything about it.
No,
they're in the
quite
wrong.
right. Yeah. Finance, there's an obvious one in terms of they're an obvious target, but they're also quite good at responding to these sort of marketing campaigns. Let's call it that in a way. But one of the other interesting things was procurement, which was a department. Again, we think, well, wait a minute. We hear a lot about the supply chain being targeted, but this is the internal perspective. Somebody in procurement who arranges the contracts of the suppliers is on that targeted list and is likely to click. So then they may not be an obvious target for someone in IT to educate and make aware.
These are the guys that create the purchase orders that get sent out, hence they're not a clear target.
They're a hub.
Yeah.
It's very annoying because they spend their entire careers telling other people what to do, in my experience. And they ought to be a little bit better at doing the right thing themselves, just if you're in procurement. Just some free advice from the table here. Well, actually from me, not from them.
Yes.
Well, it's not so good for the malware writers because obviously they always want to reduce the cost that they're paying, so they'll always pay less on the POs they send out.
But that's interesting to find those departments. Some that you'd expect, some that you wouldn't. And but what we are saying is that even if there's one person, it's enough.
Yeah.
It takes one.
Yeah. Just that 1 in 25 will definitely click on it.
Yeah.
And sometimes just by accident.
Yes.
True.
Yeah.
Particularly with devices these days, and how easy it is to accidentally click on something with your fingers if it's not that clear on the screen.
Yeah. Okay. So what should we be measuring?
So interestingly, we've got a slide here with 4 groups of information that we can start to look at. But it's actually, today's computer environment's highly fragmented. And that's something that's, again, picked up in Tony's presentation. I think that's something which we should be conscious of considering. And also the fact that this fragmented nature of compute now also includes this hybrid element. And many people are thinking, well, hybrid is just cloud plus on-premises. Well, actually, it includes legacy and heritage equipment as well. So you've got this very mixed set of systems. So understanding in terms of measuring our systems is where are the systems connected? I can think of one client many years ago, a large investment bank, and we looked at, they wanted to introduce an access control mechanism, and we looked at it, and basically it was a huge perimeter with a massive amorphous network of systems internally that had never really been controlled. They connected everything to everything. And certainly a consideration around which systems are connected. And everyone looks at architectural diagrams, but go and test them, see where the services are actually running, particularly over firewalls. And that's something I see time and time again, is that people don't actually understand which systems are running on which pieces of equipment, which services are running. And it's an important element to knowing where you get the overlaps, because it's where you get the concentration of hub, basically, and traffic. Over systems, you get these problems. User behavior, I'm going to use the who, what, where, when, because humans are doing something at a certain time. They tend to have a quite narrow set of things that they do generally within their job profile. So understanding what is normal for user behavior. A classic example, most of us go to sleep at night in a 24-hour cycle. Most of our are located in a certain place in time. We don't all travel internationally, so this idea of the highly mobile user, actually, there's boundaries temporarily and within time-based. And if we can start to build a picture of actually measuring what the user are actually doing, spotting abnormal from normal, that's a really important thing to measure, because if you know what normal looks like, you can probably spot things.
Yeah, I think systems and user behaviour go hand in hand, right? Because if they're mobile, they're going to use their mobile devices.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing, often, I think it's something like 20% of the clicks that are being done are actually on, mobile devices or off the network. So I think you mentioned that in your.
But if you're monitoring that sort of thing and you have some kind of intelligence about what you should be expecting, you match it against that.
It's the anomaly detection that's the really important part, because what's standard, if you just look at that, you get overwhelmed with information that's
Yeah.
maybe not that valuable. It's
I was
looking
gonna
for
say
the
that.
exceptions that's the real key.
Because people aren't reading their logs already, are they?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
once you start
And
putting
that's-
those extra dimensions in.
You can't measure and analyze everything. It's a case of gathering the data and then knowing what's normal, shifting that to one side. I mean, that's what big data crunching is about, is shifting the big stuff out of the way that actually isn't a problem. So you're left with the edge cases. And then finally, we'll come back to network connections, and this amorphous piece is monitoring the outbound is absolutely key. What's coming in is one thing, but actually legitimate outbound connections and monitoring that piece and measuring it is the key to at least preventing things going out. We'll talk about the kill chain a little bit later, but certainly that is one of your critical points, is knowing where things leak out. So monitoring that outbound traffic, knowing what is legitimate outbound traffic, what is not, is absolutely key.
And
to
what
this.
location?
Absolutely,
Where is
yeah.
the host you're
And
talking
yeah.
to?
There's another element in that, and that's the data flow internally,
Yeah.
because some data might be being cached somewhere else and then maybe being compressed and encrypted before it's trickled out to an external flow.
Yeah.
So if the data shouldn't be moving internally in the first place, that's another anomaly to pick up on.
Okay, but to wrap this up, this is some of this is sort of standard good security
It is.
procedure, but what we're saying is add what you expect people to be doing into this, and that's the trick. If people are behaving in weird ways, it's very
Absolutely.
often not a person.
People and systems, because the machines will be talking
Yes.
to themselves as well. So some of that data flow might be, genuine,
Yes.
just machine to machine. Others may not be.
I think now's the time to start hiring social scientists in IT.
Absolutely.
Because when we look at things like machine to machine, there's behavioural traits you can get from that. You can get some sort of quite a lot of intelligence about what's going on. There's no reason why you can't do the same thing for employees as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Without being
I
too.
think just maybe a final point is the people who are attacking our organisations are also, they're very good at understanding the people aspect and the technology aspect, and they're quite ballsy generally. They're the sort of person that is quite willing to have a go at things, but it's that combination of understanding the people and the technology aspect.
The other thing here that's very different is that, for the people trying to get into your organisation, they don't mind failure. They'll keep trying again, whereas most people in IT and business as a whole really dislike failure. So they don't try stuff until they're absolutely certain it will work. This is not the case here, because it doesn't matter if 99 out of 100 attacks fail, as long as one works, or 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 10,000. It's getting one that
Don't
works.
judge them by your own standards. Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely, they're unconstrained.
Okay, that's good. All right, thank you very much, guys. Now, remember that if you want to ask any questions about this, just let us know. Or if you've got a point, or if you disagree with what the guys are saying. I always like the disagreeing ones when they come in. Use a little tab, which I believe is below me. And so let's move on to our next section. And if we're going to look at the mind of the attacker, is that fair, Mike?
I think that's fair. Yeah. The kill chain is a good way. It's like an industry standard, actually, and it came from some research with Lockheed Martin, actually, and it's a military terminology they applied to digital crime and digital attacks rather than physical attacks. And it's an interesting one because it's very clever, because it allows you to sort of break down the process an attacker starts and ends up finishing with, them getting whatever it was they wanted from you. And so there are the different stages. So recon is the first one. So that's reconnaissance, going out there and researching your target, and so social networking, social interactions are a great way of doing that. Looking up, the old-fashioned looking up the phone book and finding that phone number and the name.
LinkedIn gives everyone's job title.
Exactly.
As a way into a business, LinkedIn is a pretty good map sometimes now, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And so reconnaissance is a key phase. And then the next one is sort of weaponization. Sounds, again, very military. I know you were...
Yeah, I'm not a great fan of military metaphors. But yeah, go on.
Okay, but I'll take it anyway. Yeah, so in this example, this is where they're really sort of starting to package up this particular attack that they're now targeting that particular individual with. So it could be that they're putting in some sort of malicious part of a PDF, and they're starting to package up essentially the attack in it and how they're going to then onto the next stage, which is deliver.
It's selecting the payload, the means of delivering it, and I think an important factor in this is actually it's industrialized.
Yes,
That's the point.
That is the point.
It's hack as a service.
Yeah.
It's essentially turned it into a commercial entity where you can churn this stuff out relatively quickly. You don't have to be spending a lot of time making bespoke systems up. You can just put it together very, very fast from the internet.
One of the Proofpoint reports actually had essentially you'd packaged up a pricing schedule for an
right,
attack,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I read that with great
yeah.
interest and thought, it's not that expensive.
No.
It really isn't that expensive.
And that was analysis of macro-based attacks. So that was interesting because the next phase is we know the person. We've now got the object that we're going to target them with. We've chosen that probably based on that. Next thing is we're going to give it to them, deliver it to them. Imagine this is like a marketing campaign almost, about creating a message and getting it to the right audience.
Better plan than most marketing campaigns.
Probably
that I've
is.
seen,
Yeah. And so in this situation, they'll decide how. So it'll be the obvious targets, and majority of that time it's going to be via email.
Yeah.
And that delivery mechanism might be a URL or an attachment within an email. And as we saw in the research, it was more likely to be an attachment at the moment. It seems to be the flavour of the month.
It could also be several attachments in different emails appearing to come from different people, again, just to expand the potential delivery of one of the weapons.
Yeah, so it's not a single point attack. It could be a web of attacks where you start to get quite sophisticated, a point where people are sending emails to each other. So again, it's that legitimate avenue that's been taken. It doesn't look abnormal to the person that's receiving it necessarily.
No, it's well formed because they know exactly who they're targeting. So done all that research. It's the right topic of conversation because they know the personality or the job function, and they've chosen the message theme and is all there. And the next phase is exploit. So how do we get the delivery, the package into the network, into the system? And so that's an exploitation of, traditionally, if we're techies, we think of technology exploiting the operating system or applications like Java. But actually you can exploit a human being.
But for today's purposes,
Well, it could be, yeah. And in fact, humans play a part in that.
Oh,
phase.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think these types of attacks we're talking about, particularly malware and email, relies upon a human interaction. Actually, it's part of it. So you're finding that, call it a weakness, people's propensity to click is part of the attack itself. It is the exploit. So everything's technically built up, but actually you're going, I know what the human behaviour is going to be. I will use that, and again, that legitimizes it once again.
Yeah. So once the exploit's taken care of, then it's the installation of the malicious software, so the Trojan or the malware or the spyware, depending on the intentions. And then we move on to command and control, or C2 as it's known in military terms. And this is really the back channel. See, he can't help himself, can he?
He's holding back.
I'm sorry.
You are holding back. This is not like
I
you.
try to go with that. C2,
yeah. And so this is the back channel that is essentially the nervous system between the cyber criminal and your own systems, and that needs to be maintained throughout the life cycle of the attack, because they often change the behaviour of whatever's inside the network. And then the last phase is action. Is what are they going to do once they're in? And essentially, they often collect the data and they package it up, encrypt it, and then send it off to the cybercrime network.
And that exfiltration of data is actually often really sophisticated. That's where they invest heavily, because the last thing you want to do is crash into a system, grab whatever data you can find, and then clear off. We see attacks that last months, years.
Wow. Yeah.
Once you're in and it's low and slow, you can start to slice data out very gently. And once you're in, it's harvesting data. It's not smashing.
Just take
around.
what you need, and you're less likely to be stopped.
The data's usually encrypted so that if you've got any DLP gateways on there, they can't see what's inside it, so to block it straight off.
But what we're saying is that a large part of certainly the middle of this is based around what people do and how they act suboptimally for security.
And if we definitely influence. And certainly, if we applied this slide to the previous one, what should we be measuring? You can start to see the mapping in here of the systems, people's behaviour. So you can map the two together, and you can start to see where you can measure in the kill chain as well. So you can start to understand what should I be looking for to see when I see this compromise occurring.
So now we asked you for some stories, and you helpfully provided some from real life. So yeah.
Well, this is a great one because it's really a human factor, really. It's very interesting. They got a well-crafted email, so there was the reconnaissance phase was spot on, and it was targeted to a VP in a French international organisation, and the email came in, and it was like an invoice or something along those lines, a spreadsheet. So it was packaged up with the right content, office-based document. The right theme, and the email was received, and then the PA got a phone call. Almost immediately, the email was received to say, "Oh, you've just received this email. And I'm the VP that sent it. Sounded perfect, perfect French, very authoritative, very assertive, shall we say." You need to open that because I need you to action it now. It's really urgent. We've got a time, whatever.
Nice.
So yeah, urgency
You've got
is
to
a key
admire
thing.
you've got to admire the thinking behind it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they knew the organisation well. So the reconnaissance again, very, very good. The attachment opened, and she put the phone down, and she thought she'd done her job. But I think what was interesting about this is that she later on thought something's not right. That when I opened up the email, there was nothing. It wasn't, or the attachment, it wasn't what I was expecting, or the machine might be behaving in a strange way, and so she reported, and that's how they found it. It wasn't with the detection systems in place.
Right. But really, that's the sort of thing that a lot of people would fall for. It's very, very difficult to say to people, don't do something like that.
But how often with hindsight you go, oh, should I? And it's that reflective moment. Suspicion is a cognitive thing. It's cognitive behaviour rather than something we're necessarily good at. When we're actually busy.
It also comes back to this idea that people don't like to be seen as doing something wrong or having failures. So if you've got this feeling, or if your users have got this feeling that something's gone wrong, and if they report it to IT or whoever's in charge of security and they can't find anything, are they going to report it again the next time they have a feeling?
You don't want to have a reputation as a can't-do person, do you?
Well, it's also the person doing the reporting doesn't want to feel like I'm the one always shouting wolf. When suddenly the wolf turns up at the door, and that gets ignored.
Well, that's why tell people that it is okay.
Yes,
exactly. And IT's also got to recognise, or whoever's dealing with this has got to recognise, it's okay to find things are okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Next one.
Okay, this is interesting. We call this a multivariant one. But again, email is the key here. Obviously, it's come in. There's a link. What's interesting about this is that this particular attack. This is where we're talking about the sort of exploit. The delivery is email, but the exploitation now varies depending on the system that they're on. So this is back to the system and the user. So if they were on a Windows machine, they had an exploit kit Sweet Orange served up at them. If they were on an Android device, they had a fake security update to install a sense of urgency there. And if it was anything else, that bucket just went straight to sort of like a medical and pharmaceutical spam. And that's where they went to a website. So there was multiple stages. It was a broad brush approach campaign, but nonetheless, just to show you that the exploitation isn't just one-off. There might be multiple actions based on the user or the device that they're on.
So just as we're getting legitimate applications designed to recognise which platform they're on.
Yes.
And
targeted.
No, in fact, not all of them do really, do they?
Not as well as they might.
Not as well as they might.
It's even worse than that because, as well, some of the exploit kits will know when they've been put into a sandbox. If they're running on a virtualized platform, then they just don't trigger the malicious action.
So sandboxing them has no effect because you're not going to find anything out.
Depends how you sandbox and what you do, but the point is that the malware's become much more sophisticated. Some of it's still very simple, absolutely, but there are some, particularly for the more targeted attacks that we're talking about today, that really are very clever, and they know if you're just testing them, at least to a degree. So the testing has to be quite sophisticated to work out things.
Some of the Dridex attacks, the variants in there were actually quite interesting in that later ones. And we're just moving on to Dridex. We're on it actually. And it,
you anticipated.
I did, didn't I? Sorry.
Almost like you knew what was coming next.
Ooh, but certainly with Dridex, talking about the variants and the changes in the attacks, there was a point in Dridex where it was detecting or understanding when things were going to be sandboxed, because it tends to be on activation, opening of something, and actually it was the close command that actually executed the payload. There was a variant in that, which actually somebody very cleverly realised, right, what do humans do? Right, they program the rule to open it when it's activated, when in fact actually, who thinks about activating something when you close?
Yeah.
And to me, I think it's a very subtle change. I was impressed by it, to be honest, but that was an example of where, again, it's a human rule change.
Yeah, actually, cyber criminals are looking at human behaviour, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, as you were saying. I mean, we laughed when you said it's time that companies had a social scientist involved in them to look at this. But yet, if we're thinking about the way in which people naturally act, and we're trying to design around that so that so that people's impulses are not the weak point, that we're protecting them against that. Some thinking through of that is necessary.
I think so.
It?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And so, just to wrap up on this, because we've covered a little bit of it, this was interesting because this was a macro-based attack, and we've seen a big rise in that over the last few months. And what's interesting about macros, which, you know, again, old school, it used to happen years and years ago. And now you open up a document and there are security settings within, you know, those operating systems and applications say, you know, I've disabled the active content because it might be dangerous, you know, but everyone sees that. Back to your signposts, we've all seen that every day. And, you know, if you're finance and you're working spreadsheets, you know you've got to enable the content in order to actually get the pivot tables to work and the external data to get imported. It's exactly what they do. They even show you in the attachment, here's the button you need to click to activate the malicious activity that we're about to, you know, launch onto you. So again, playing very much on the human aspect, and it's a familiar, process.
It doesn't quite come across completely in this slide, but these are well formed. You know,
Yes.
we're not getting the spelling mistakes. We're not talking about the 411 scammers from years ago where it was poorly formed language.
Yeah.
These are well formed. That's the point. Is unless you stop to actually look at it, it looks exactly right.
I think we are still getting the poorly formed stuff, but now we're getting very well formed stuff
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not that the old stuff has stopped, but we're getting
There's a better quality.
You think, oh well, it's not like that other stuff, so therefore this must be all right. That's the thinking, isn't it?
True.
Well, guys, so to wrap this up, this is all rather depressing, perhaps.
No,
I don't. You know, I don't mind. You know, Tony loves this stuff. But, but are we saying that what we're saying? Are we saying that we've been totally outsmarted?
No, I don't think so. I think it's actually a reflection on where we are now. And what we've described just now has been maybe a realistic view of actually how it works. And we've been, certainly I think the industry has talked a lot about, it's been caught in technology, and it's now time to shift our focus into, broaden it into the business aspect. We've talked for a couple of years now in the industry of broadening information security out into the business. Well, actually, the proof's starting to come because the human factors that are being preyed upon are actually across the business. So it's not in the IT and technology group.
True.
This is affecting people in human resources, in finance, in procurement. So actually it gives us a really good position to actually go out and talk to these parts of the business and engage them. So I don't see it as depressing. I see it as actually being an opportunity now because we can start to draw this human factor out, and it's a good reason to go and talk to the business about this.
And the register audience knows this as well.
Yeah.
We've surveyed them not too long ago, earlier this year, around mobile security. And again, what came out from those results? People are acknowledged to be the weakest link in security in mobile. It's the same in all parts of the infrastructure, whether it's the end users or IT ourselves looking after things, because there we can make mistakes or get attacked, as we've been talking about. So people really are known to be the issue here, and what can we do about it?
Well, in our final part, then let's actually look at what we can do about it, and let's try and tidy this up for people to make sure that. That it isn't, that we aren't just stuck in thinking it's hopeless, because it's not, is it? I'm assuming.
No, hope is not lost. I think, we showed you the kill chain, and yes, it is very military, but I have to say, it's a great way to categorise your attacker. If you understand how that attacker behaves, and they follow this pretty much to the letter, to be honest. So once you understand that, then we can start organising ourselves around that, right? That makes a lot of sense. And I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is that they're a business. They make money. They make a lot of money. In fact, they make more money than some other, less or more dubious types of industries. But the fact is they make a lot of money because they're very good at being efficient at various things. They outsource where they need to. They in-house when they need to. They look for creativity. They look for the latest trends. Just like I'm a strategist looking for the latest trends in the marketplace, they've got somebody similar doing the same thing. So they've got a lot of money invested in this process because what they want to get at the end is often very valuable. But they won't spend lots of money all the time. So if they want something that is less valuable and it's to a broader audience, they'll spend less money. And one of the things, if you think about it, each of those stages is a process in the attack. And each one of those processes could be outsourced or in-housed. And if I was somebody in marketing, I might blow all my budget with the story and the message and be up front and have nothing left to actually deliver and execute the campaign with. So what we find is they might spend a lot of money on one element. They might get a 0-day exploit because they know that it's not in the signature list. But now they've spent so much money on that they've got little money to deliver the attack, and they'll leverage off-the-shelf or commoditise parts of it, like a command and control network.
Welcome to our world, cyber criminals. Yeah.
And so, of course, the thing is, what's interesting is that you will probably have seen something of what they've done before, because they've reused someone else's technology.
Right.
So that's the weak link. They are their weakest link at some point in that kill chain.
It is a whole ecosystem. It's a whole supply chain of their own in terms of getting the various bits and pieces. Some of it's even been SaaS'd, so it's delivered as a service.
Exactly. I mean, what's really interesting, we chatted about this before, but the Drydex campaign had a really interesting return on investment reporting mechanism built into the campaign kit, and every time the email was received, a little ping went back to the server to say, yes, it got delivered, so that's great, and they could maybe make a phone call if they were going to go down that road. But then there was another ping when the email was opened and the attachment was clicked on. So they could tell how successful, and if the success rate dropped off, they would change their campaign on the fly. So it is very industrialised. I think we said that almost at the beginning.
And it's also not fire and forget. I think that's the point here, is it's maintained. And there's a cost associated with that. Every stage has a cost associated.
It's a people business on the attack side as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think often the weakest link here in general is the command and control piece, because they need that. If you cut that off, it's almost like cutting the head off in a way.
Which is exactly why we mentioned the outbound monitoring piece as being absolutely critical. Because if they've got to that point where we're into command and control, then the outbound is the critical thing to disrupt.
Yes.
So, we talked about the attackers and how we can use that framework against them. And there's a lot we can do there, and there's a lot of insight we can get. There's two ways to understand how you get that insight. You have to wait for you to see the attack, and then you work it out yourself with your own investigation and response teams. Or you leverage the world and everyone else's view of the attack landscape and ask somebody outside the organisation, I've just seen this, command and control channel, that's just one element of it. Has anyone else seen it? Oh yeah, I've seen that host. And then you start to map where that host has been in the attack chain somewhere else. And then we find out that they've been sending like a new delivery mechanism, a new type of email we've not seen before. But then when we look at that, we can then say, oh, I've seen that email in my network. And then you see lots of others. So you can, once you've detected one element of it, you can walk backwards and forwards in the attack chain and go back in time, as well as looking at potentially forward.
And is this something people should be doing internally within their own IT departments, or is it done by aggregators such as yourselves?
So, well, without sounding too salesy, I actually think it's better done by aggregators for one good reason. If you carry it out yourself, you've got to view your reliance on pulling other data in and trying to pull it together.
Yeah.
And if I think about our security operations centre, we run across lots of industries with lots of clients. So we're already aggregating that intelligence, and quite often we'll get clients calling us and saying, we're starting to get these alerts. Our own IT department has spoken to us about this. Somebody has noticed something in the press. We'll have already put something out because we'll have noticed it, the attack happening elsewhere in an industry. And I know certainly when the Drydex campaigns were really at their height towards the back end of last year, and we were seeing these mass phishing campaigns, being able to turn to a client who didn't know exactly which way to maneuver or what to tell their executives, to be able to tell them, it's not you, it's not your industry, this is a general phishing campaign. That has a different response to being able to say, we're not seeing this anywhere else in the industry. We're seeing well-formed, we're seeing different parts of the kill chain affecting, and we're putting in controls. That requires a different response. So I think it's about perspective, and that's where the integrators can provide that. I'm not saying you shouldn't and can't build your own operations, but it becomes more difficult, and you lose some of that insight that you gain as an aggregator of data.
And many companies just wouldn't have the resources all the time to do this, or budgets to do it.
Yeah.
And that the whole threat intelligence side of what's actually going on is something that the register audience has told us, on several surveys now going over the last 2 or 3 years, that it's becoming more and more visible to them as a value add as well. Whereas in the past, I think 3 or 4 years ago, people would have said threat intelligence. Do we need it? Now that's changed a lot.
So if we look at it from a cost perspective, the fact that an aggregator can analyse a lot of this data. Again, we talk about actionable intelligence has been mentioned in the press for about 12 months by companies. Well, actually, we should be providing those kinds of services to clients, which is around interpreting this for your industry. You shouldn't have to interpret this. It should be the suppliers doing this for you, and that again, that's the value out of being able to do that across a number of industries.
Yeah, I mean, before we move off this slide, this is a good way. I mean, when you listen to government and general industry guidance, they kind of have this pillared approach to cybersecurity: prepare, prevent as much as you can. Realise that you can't prevent everything, detect it as quickly as possible, and then respond to it in an effective manner. That seems like a good logical way of doing it. And we map that to the kill chain just to show you that it does work. And in the preparation phase, there's a lot you can do before you even see the attack. You know, you can mine that threat intelligence. You can come and ask someone like us or Fujitsu that, I'm in the finance industry. Tell me what I should be aware of. What's out there that's targeting my industry?
You can let your meat bags know that this is going to show up. Yeah.
Yes.
It's also a question of, as it says, understand your risk posture. So what data do I have? Is it in the right places? Is it properly protected already? Where should it be going? And that, again, getting that core fundamental information on what should things look like. And we've got something different already. Maybe we should take care of that just to prepare.
Cuts down the work you're going to have to do later.
Well, actually, if you're well prepared, you might change the way you protect the business because you now understand the value of what you're protecting.
You've got some data in the wrong place, and we can take care of that and move it somewhere else, so that we've got too many people accessing some data that maybe they shouldn't do.
It moves prevention away from being a broad brush approach to one of, I need to prevent where I really need to. So it starts to actually, if you look upon it, if you start with the preparation, you can then focus your prevention, so reduce the noise. If I've got my prevention in the right place, I mean, how many AV systems are not as effective as you expect them to be? They're never going to be perfect, but they're not necessarily as effective as we expect. And that's probably because of the broad brush approach to it. So if you've got at least some preparation of knowing where it's going to occur, the things to protect, then at least you can start to put prevention in the right place.
And it makes your management by exception practical.
Absolutely.
Because you're not throwing up all these false positives.
The other flip side of this as well is that this is the point where you can look at the preparation and the protection, the preventative piece, as perhaps enabling your business to consume cloud services, to take a more mobile approach. And it's that side of it, if that you're looking at the prepare and prevent piece, that's actually going to help enable these kinds of digital practices.
And again, the fear of security risks, or just fear generally, as we know, stop the audience often doing things that they'd like to do as a business, or at least wait for some time until they've got something working for it. The other big area here that the companies really have to look at is that response side and what to do when something happens, because that's an issue that often gets left until something happens, which is maybe a bit too late.
And I think this is, for me, this is front and centre now, is that organisations, we've got, above the line is essentially external information, so we're preparing. The internal is what's going on in my environment. I can combine the two, look at some contextual information about which services we're running over, which systems, start to bring that together, and knowing what your normal looks like, so that when abnormalities occur, you can analyse them. And I think this is where prepare, plan, drill is really important, because by at least preparing the business, not just the IT group, but preparing the business for when things go bad. HR having a representative, legal having a representative, finance having a representative that's a little bit educated about how to actually run an incident.
If necessary, having someone from PR around
absolutely,
to deal with the external
and
communications if that's something important to your business.
And for me, the key message is don't knee-jerk incidents, because actually it's a continuum of information that you need to monitor as incidents are occurring. The panic button is the worst thing to press, really, because you may gain information that says, you know what, this isn't a P1. We've just discovered that somebody's made an out-of-bound change on one of our firewall rules bases, doing the right thing, the human factor of trying to do the right thing, and may be able to stand that down, because once you've started incident response, it becomes more expensive.
And also then people, if you've got all these incident responses going on, people learn to ignore them or just
deprioritise them.
Absolutely.
I think what's interesting about this section here is that you've probably got a lot of this data already. It's just that you don't see it or you don't draw it in at the right time to make the right decision. So this knee-jerk thing is exactly right.
You need one person who's got to be the hub of that.
You need a process to actually handle the response. It's about a process, not a person. And having a process that everybody knows what the process is and how to go through it, which should involve some practice, but at least awareness generally, so that you don't get the panic and the knee-jerk, because quite often panicking makes things worse, not better.
Okay, can we move to our, because I wanted you to give people advice at the end. Basically, What do you do now? Let's go away in the next 5 minutes.
Some sage points.
We scared the wits out of everybody at the beginning.
I doubt that.
You know, if we did, well, you know, I sort of hope we did. But I'm differently motivated than you guys. Now, but let's have a look at I think practical things. So your first thing is your kill chain.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's the one simple thing you can do. Literally, you know, when you're finished on this, go and search, research a kill chain. In fact, we've got a link to a paper on that on this webinar. Just read about it and understand about it, and then start to sort of almost do your daily job around it. You know, talk to the IT department, the business about, you know, the different stages and what you've got. And I think then you can almost see gaps in where you're not
how well
effective.
is my environment, my people, my processes mapped to that kill chain? Do I have any gaps?
So is it worth getting in a room, writing it down on a
Absolutely,
whiteboard,
yeah.
and getting some ideas from people about?
Absolutely. Do we have something that mitigates that part of the kill chain?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it any good? Yeah, it's okay. It's 80% complete, right. Do we have anything for that piece? No. Is it a problem? No, because we can disrupt it with the next piece. So it's understanding. You don't need to fill every single box in. This isn't about going to the CEO or the CIO and asking for
buying lots of things.
Yeah,
because you won't get them now because we've already insulted procurement earlier.
Yes.
That's it.
But you've got to understand, you know, where you stand now, what could happen, and the process and how you're going to deal with it, so that you know what the things you need to do and when you need to do them.
I agree, and you know, there's a definite technology, you know, element here, but it's about technology, people, and process. I think you need to look at it in that way.
Yeah.
So they stay vigilant.
So this is about this proactive piece, is being vigilant, not waiting for it to be reported in the press, because quite often that's, you know, it's maybe blown up. It's an interesting article. I'm not having a ding at the press, because actually the press is getting better at reporting things. I look at, you know, Heartbleed, Bash, other things that were reported. It raised the awareness, which was good last year, and very quickly, because
if you want to have a go, bring it on.
But on the flip side of it is also being vigilant and prepared yourself. Don't rely on other people to tell you what is bad.
Yeah.
And that's really where I'm going with this, is don't rely on broadcast to tell you what's going wrong. Is this vigilance and preparation, is understanding, come back to your point, Tony, around what your threat profile really looks like for you. What does it look like for your industry? What does it look like for your organisation? Talk to your peers. I don't think we're doing enough of that amongst industry bodies at the moment. The finance sector is, I think, doing quite a good job in this respect. The reason is, if you get all of a certain industry to gang up, the resources available to that industry massively outweigh the resources available to the people who are trying to get to some of the data. If you looked at the amount of money that was spent, say, in pharmaceuticals on cybersecurity, and you start to share that data about things. We're not talking about sensitive commercial data, but we're talking about common things that they get attacked by. Sharing that information, you start to pool resources, and you put up a much, it's kind of the pack mentality almost.
And some of that best practice there, because that's what we're really talking about, good practice or best practice. Can involve, you know, the whole people side as well. It's not just about, you know, how to classify things.
I'll find because we do have to wrap up now. I just want to skip to that sort of focus on the people, because I have a question here. It's a Danny saying, is there any sort of videos or education programs that you would put in front of staff? He's looked for stuff and he hasn't been able to find it.
So we do talk about this a lot in the industry, about making awareness. So awareness campaigns, yes. But what I'd start to look at is actually coming back to this point around preparing, is don't go broad brush with preparation on people, is start to look, maybe your PA is a really good group to educate in the first instance.
Talk about things specific to your company that you see as the threats.
Maybe you say, you know what, to our execs, we've got a group of them, let's look at the people who work around those, give them some awareness training and some specific training around that. Look at who has your privileged access. Maybe go into the HR and procurement department and just start to educate on that basis. Start small and start at the top. And
give them the confidence that they can cry wolf if they think something's wrong, to get it checked, rather than just hope that it's not, in the fear that I look silly if there's nothing happening.
An open door policy. I mean, you could use examples of attacks. We showed you a couple here. You can use those as say, look, this is what happened to the person, you know, like you, sitting where you are today with the responsibilities you had. And walk them through it, you know, and show them.
It's a 20-minute workshop rather than a video and a program and everything. I think keeping it small also allows people
Small,
to absorb it.
focus, short time. You will also be able to use the registers on demand, Regcast, for some of this. But yes, the point is specifically talk to people, treat them as human beings,
Absolutely, yeah.
not as just purely as video watchers.
Awareness should be an engagement.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing thing. It's not something you do once and then come back to in 3 years' time when you do a review.
All right. Well, that's a good place to finish, guys, especially because we're out of time. And so, Mike, Andy, thank you very much for popping in. Tony, you live here now, so I can't really thank you. Thank you as an audience. We've got a survey, so please fill that in. Let us know what you think, because we want to do the best we can for you. And talk about engagement. We want to engage you. And did that sound cheesy? It was a bit much, wasn't it? But yeah, it's all right. I can take it as well. But thank you very much, audience. Hope that's been useful for you. Do let us know. Meanwhile, keep looking out for a future Regcast. There'll be more along soon. My name's been Tim Phillips, and from the Register, goodbye.